Welcome to the Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel. If you're here to learn the absolute core, actionable insights from the best nonfiction books without having to read them, please subscribe to hear new book summaries every week. Today we are diving deep into James Clear's international bestseller, Atomic Habits. Tiny changes, remarkable results.
And this book, it's really become foundational, hasn't it? For anyone who's serious about how human behavior works, it moves the whole conversation away from just vague ideas like willpower, and it grounds everything in systematic, repeatable mechanics.
Right. So our deep dive today is to really extract the surprising origins of his whole philosophy, and more importantly, to comprehensively break down the 4 essential laws of behavior change he developed. We really want you to walk away from this understanding not just what the habits are, but actually how to construct them.
Exactly. And to do that, you have to start with his story. To really grasp why James Clear is so fixated on the power of these tiny 1% improvements, we can't start with business theory. We have to start with this horrifying moment that almost ended his life.
It's the ultimate origin story for his whole philosophy, right?
Yeah.
That idea of gradual recovery.
It's absolutely crucial context. He was just a high school sophomore, and he was accidentally struck in the face by a baseball bat. It slipped from a teammate's hands during practice. The initial details, they sound like something from a crash report, honestly.
The impact was just devastating. The book recounts these catastrophic injuries. His nose was crushed into a U-shape. He had multiple skull fractures. Both eye sockets were shattered. And the force of the blow slammed his brain against the inside of his skull, which caused this, immediate severe swelling.
Right. This wasn't just a concussion. This was a life-threatening trauma.
Totally. And the cognitive fallout, that really underscores just how severe it was.
Yeah. When the nurse asked him those basic questions, who's the president? What year is it?
Mm-hmm.
He was just fundamentally disoriented. He said the year was 1998.
When it was 2002.
Exactly. And he named Bill Clinton as the president 4 years after he'd left office. That kind of total break with reality is just, it's terrifying. And it only got worse from there.
Yes. The spiral into a full-on medical crisis was so fast. He lost consciousness, he couldn't swallow or breathe properly, and he had multiple post-traumatic seizures. They had to put him into a medically induced coma on a ventilator before flying him to a major trauma center.
For him and his family, that whole experience was about survival, not self-improvement.
And it's the slow, grinding nature of that recovery that really informed his entire framework later on. Even after the immediate crisis was over, the trauma just kept going in these bizarre, really vivid ways. There's that unforgettable detail about the fractured eye socket.
Right. Oh, the eye socket thing it's grotesque. But it's a perfect illustration of how precarious his whole situation was. A nurse, just testing his sense of smell, asked him to blow his nose. And the pressure from that forced air through the fractured orbital bones, and it pushed his left eye outward from the socket.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was basically held in place only by his eyelid and the optic nerve. That kind of injury requires months and months of slow, meticulous healing. He had double vision for weeks. It took 8 months before he could even drive a car again. We're talking about a really long, painful, and overwhelmingly gradual process.
And when he finally got back to his passion, baseball, he faced this massive emotional setback. He was cut from the varsity team as a junior. For a kid who lived and breathed baseball, whose dad had played professionally, that humiliation, that failure after fighting so hard just to recover, it must have been shattering.
It really was. That's a point where most people would just give up on the sport entirely. But this is the pivot point. Since he wasn't just naturally succeeding anymore, he had to find a different path. So when he started college at Denison University, he wasn't looking for some grand plan. He was just looking for these minor incremental habits that could give him back some sense of control.
And what were those first habits?
Yeah.
They were almost laughably mundane, weren't they?
They really were. Things like going to bed early enough to actually feel rested, keeping his dorm room tidy, making his bed, taking out the trash. These were tiny little victories, but they started to compound. They gave him this foundation of discipline that it rippled outwards.
And that control translated into straight A's his first year.
Exactly. And in the weight room, he just committed to lifting weights multiple times a week. And over 6 years, that persistence bulked up his 6'4" frame from 170 to 200 pounds of muscle.
And the end result was just spectacular. He went from being cut from the varsity team in high school to being named the top male athlete at the entire university and an academic All-American. It wasn't one big decision that did it. It was the accumulation of years of these small, almost boring daily actions.
Right. That entire journey from a coma to an elite athlete is the living proof of the book's promise. Changes that seem small and unimportant at first will compound into these remarkable results if you just maintain that consistency.
And that personal journey brings us right to the core philosophy that underpins the whole book. The concept of the aggregation of marginal gains, which is so beautifully illustrated by the British cycling team.
Oh, that story is it's the perfect example. Before 2003, British cycling was the absolute epitome of failure. Their performance was so historically bad that in over a century, they had won only a single gold medal at the Olympics.
And the anecdote that really drives this home is that a major European bike manufacturer flat out refused to sell them gear. They were afraid that if the British team was seen using their bikes, it would actually hurt their sales reputation. That's how low their stock was.
That level of failure, it demanded a radical solution.
Yeah.
So when Dave Brailsford was hired as performance director in 2003, he introduced this strategy that everyone initially ridiculed. The idea of finding a tiny margin of improvement, just 1% in everything they did.
Just 1%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His hypothesis was that if you could break down every single component of riding a bike and improve each individual piece by that microscopic amount, the cumulative effect would be just staggering.
And we often hear about the obvious things, right? Better bikes, better training. But Brailsford took this 1% idea to these absurd and wonderful extremes. They didn't just redesign the bikes. They experimented with different massage gels to see which one gave the fastest muscle recovery. They redesigned the bike seats for optimal comfort. They even discovered that electrically heated overshorts could keep muscle temperature at the perfect level right before a race.
And then they got into areas that seemed totally unrelated to cycling. They hired a surgeon to teach the riders the absolute best way to wash their hands to reduce the risk of catching a cold.
Just to guarantee more training days.
Exactly. And they tested dozens of different mattresses and pillows to figure out the perfect combination for the best sleep for each individual athlete.
The most incredible detail, for me, is the cleanliness obsession. They figured that dust particles could degrade the performance of their finely tuned bikes. So what was their solution? They painted the inside of the team truck white.
So that every single speck of dust became immediately visible and could be cleaned instantly. They were optimizing the air quality around the bikes.
A dust spotting truck. It's the physical manifestation of that whole idea.
Yeah.
They weren't looking for 100% breakthrough. They were chasing 101% improvements.
And the results were anything but marginal. Just 5 years later, at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, the team completely dominated. They won an astonishing 60% of the gold medals available.
Wow.
4 years after that, in London, they set 9 Olympic records and 7 world records. And then they took that success to the Tour de France, securing 5 victories in 6 years with different riders, Bradley Wiggins and Chris Froome.
You just can't argue with that data. It shows that those tiny, invisible improvements weren't wasted at all. They compounded. But this brings us to a huge psychological barrier that Clear addresses right away. If small changes are so powerful, why does everyone quit? Because progress is fundamentally not linear.
This is what every curious learner needs to get. You start a new language, you hit the gym for 3 weeks, you put in all this effort, and you see zero noticeable, visible difference. So what do? You conclude the system isn't working, and you stop. Clear calls this difficult period the plateau of latent potential.
The ice cube metaphor he uses is just so powerful for explaining why we misread the process.
It is. Imagine you've got an ice cube in a room. The temperature slowly rises from, say, 25 degrees Fahrenheit up to 31 degrees. You are putting in energy, you're raising the temperature, but there is zero visible change in that ice cube. But that very next degree, 32 degrees, unlocks this massive, instantaneous transformation. The initial effort wasn't pointless. It was being stored in the system, preparing for that sudden shift.
And if you were to graph this, our expectation, what we think should happen, is this straight, linear, upward line. I put in X amount of effort, I get Y amount of result. But what actually happens is this slow, flat, really frustrating curve at the bottom, and then, boom, this exponential growth surge once you break that plateau.
Right. And that specific gap between your expected linear progress and the reality of that much slower curve, that's what Clear calls the valley of disappointment. This is the psychological breaking point. It's where most people quit because they wrongly assume that weeks of hard work with no visible results must mean their effort was wasted. They stop right before the melting point.
But the effort wasn't wasted at all. It was accumulating, like the tension building in tectonic plates before an earthquake.
Yeah, right.
Or Or the stonecutter analogy.
That's a great one. You might hammer away at a rock 100 times without a single crack appearing, but that 101st blow splits it in two. And the point is, it wasn't that last blow that did it, it was all that had gone before. Mastery requires understanding that the small efforts are compounding, even when you can't see them. Patience is the necessary precondition for exponential growth.
So consistency, not intensity, is the true engine here. So if consistency is the key to getting over that disappointment curve, what exactly should we be consistent at? This is where we start talking about the big results we want and start focusing on the microscopic machinery of change, the system itself. And this is where Clear makes his pivotal argument. We have to focus on systems, not goals.
And the crucial thing here isn't just defining the words, but really understanding the philosophical shift. A goal is a terminal point, a one-time achievement, like winning a championship or finishing a book. A system is cyclical. It's the structure of continuous self-correcting processes that lead to that result. The daily training schedule, the writing routine.
And the central question Clear forces us to ask is really challenging because it runs counter to how we're all taught to think about ambition. It's a favorite theme every form. If you completely ignored the final goal, the scoreboard, and you focused only on optimizing and improving your daily system, would you still succeed?
And his conclusion is a resounding yes, because the result is always a natural byproduct of the process. If a musician ignores the goal of winning a Grammy and instead just focuses on building the best possible system, daily practice, effective composition, finding great collaborators, the excellence of that system makes the Grammy an inevitability. A system is an engine for long-term progress. A goal is just a marker in the sand.
But doesn't the goal provide the initial motivation? If I want to lose 50 pounds, ignoring that huge goal seems impossible.
That's the common assumption for sure. But Clear argues that the goal is only useful for directing your ship. Once your direction is set, all your energy has to shift to managing the sails and the engine, the system. And he details 3 major problems that come up when we stay stuck in a goals-first mentality.
Let's start with the first one, something every entrepreneur and athlete falls into. Problem number 1, the survivorship bias.
Right. We see the winners, the survivors, and we assume their ambitious goals were the thing that made the difference. We look at an Olympic champion and say, oh, they just wanted gold more than anyone else. But that ignores the obvious reality. Every single competitor at the Olympics wanted that gold medal just as intensely. If winners and losers share the exact same goal, then the goal itself cannot be the factor that separates them.
It brings us right back to British cycling. Their goal, winning races, had been the same for 100 years. The only thing that changed was their system. The implementation of those continuous tiny improvements. The process was the differentiator.
The second problem, problem number 2, addresses the temporary nature of achievement. Reaching a goal is, by its very definition, a momentary change.
The messy room analogy is perfect for this, and it's something everyone can relate to. Your goal is to clean your room. You spend an afternoon tidying up, and for one glorious moment, it's clean. You did it. But if you haven't changed the underlying system, your sloppy habits, the clutter will be back within a week.
You focused only on the outcome, the clean room, without addressing the cause, the flawed daily habits. Achieving the goal means you finish the job, so you stop. You treated the symptom, not the underlying condition. If you don't change the system, you're just doomed to constantly repeat the cycle. You'll need another burst of heroic effort every few weeks to get the same temporary result.
And the final philosophical challenge, problem number 3. The goal-first mentality actually restricts happiness. This is a profound insight.
It really is. The implicit assumption baked into goal setting is always, once I reach this milestone, then I'll be happy. Clear admits he fell into this trap himself many times, believing that once he hit a certain weight or got some business award, he could finally relax and feel satisfied.
But that mentality puts happiness in a cage, doesn't it? It's always deferring satisfaction to some future state that might not even arrive. Or it arrives and feels hollow. It creates this either-or conflict. Either you succeed and you're happy, or you fail and you feel like a disappointment.
And life rarely follows that exact narrow path you planned out. True long-term satisfaction shouldn't be restricted to one successful scenario. We should learn to get satisfaction from the daily execution, from the consistent improvement of the system itself, because that process is what guarantees continuous progress. You have to fall in love with the process, not the product.
So if we agree the systems are better than goals, then the next question is, what's the most potent target for our systems? Clear argues that behavior change isn't just about what you do, but who you believe you are. We have to target the deepest layer, our identity.
He uses this great illustration of concentric circles to break down the 3 layers of change. The outer layer is outcomes. Those are your results. The weight loss, the book publish. The middle layer is processes. Those are your habits and systems. The gym routine, the meditation practice.
And the deep central layer, the nucleus of lasting change, is identity. Identity is about fundamentally changing your beliefs, your self-image, your worldview, the judgments you have about yourself. When people try to improve, they almost always start at the outcome layer. I want to lose 40 pounds.
And then they jump to the process. Okay, I'll stick to this complicated diet. But because they haven't addressed that central layer, the old identity, their internal self-image, is constantly sabotaging the new behavior. If your core belief is, I'm the kind of person who is bad with money or I'm not athletic, you feel this internal, often subconscious pressure to act in a way that's consistent with that belief. It makes the new habit feel unnatural and stressful.
The distinction between an outcome-based response and an identity-based response.
Yeah.
That's a real light bulb moment for a lot of people. Let's use the classic example of being offered a cigarette.
Right. The outcome-based person says, no thanks, I'm trying to quit. That phrasing, it signals a conflict. They're still fundamentally a smoker, but they're currently spending a lot of effort to resist. The change hasn't been internalized.
But the identity-based person says, no thanks, I'm not a smoker. That tiny decisive statement signals that the shift has already happened at the deepest level. Smoking is not aligned with their current self-image. The action just flows naturally, without effort, from the belief. The focus shifts from, what do I want to achieve, to, who do I want to become?
And that transition from saying, I want this result, to I am this person is the ultimate form of intrinsic motivation. We often think intrinsic motivation comes from some deep passion, but Clear argues it really comes from the pride you associate with maintaining your identity.
That's where that anecdote about the entrepreneur Brian Clark and his nail-chewing habit is so relevant. He initially stopped just through sheer willpower, which is exhausting, right? It's not sustainable. What sustained the change was this unexpected identity shift after his first manicure.
Yeah, he was surprised by how clean and nice his nails looked, and he felt this sudden sense of pride in them. All of a sudden, his motivation wasn't about avoiding the pain of quitting. It was about maintaining the pride he took in his healthy nails. The more pride you associate with an aspect of your identity, your diet, your punctuality, your clean workspace, the more motivated you are to maintain the habits that go with it. Pride reinforces the habit.
So how do we build this new identity? It doesn't just happen overnight. Clear is very specific about this. Identity is built on proof. You don't just declare you're a certain type of person. You have to accumulate evidence through daily, repeated actions.
Exactly. Every time you perform a habit, no matter how small, you cast a vote for the type of person you wish to become. If you go to the gym, you're casting a vote for athlete.
Yeah.
If you write one sentence, you cast a vote for writer. It's like a democratic process, and the identity that wins is the one that has the majority of the votes.
Clear, as an author, he used this directly. He didn't wait until he felt like a writer. He became one by publishing a new article every Monday and Thursday for years. His habits provided the evidence, and the identity of writer just followed over time.
So the goal isn't just to lose 40 pounds. The goal is to become the type of person who is a healthy eater. The key question to ask yourself is, who is the type of person that could get the outcome I want? You start with the desired results and work backward to define the identity, and then the specific small habits that person would do every day. This makes sure your systems are always aligned with your deep central beliefs.
Okay, so now that we understand what to change identity and how to approach change systems, let's get into the mechanics of how habits are actually formed. The book breaks this process down into the 4 simple steps of the habit loop: cue, craving, response, and reward.
This is the basic feedback loop of all learned behavior, and it's rooted in classic psychology. Clear references E.L. Thorndike's early work, particularly those famous puzzle box experiments with cats.
Right, Thorndike would place a hungry cat inside a box, and outside was a visible bowl of food. The cat had to just stumble upon a specific lever or pull a string to open the door. And at first the cat would just thrash around randomly. But once it found the lever, the action was instantly associated with a satisfying consequence: the reward of food.
And with repetition, the cats drastically reduced the time they spent thrashing around. They quickly went straight to the solution. The core finding was the law of effect. Behaviors followed by satisfying consequences tend to be repeated, and those followed by uncomfortable consequences are less likely to be repeated. It's the simple logic our brains use to program habits.
The 4 steps of the loop are just our modern interpretation of that mechanism. The cue, like the sound of the lever, triggers the craving, anticipating the food, which motivates the response, pulling the lever, which delivers the reward, eating the food. The reward then satisfies the craving, and it reinforces the whole process so the cue gets more powerful next time.
But the critical step, the engine that drives all of this, is the craving. And that's where dopamine comes in. For decades, scientists incorrectly thought dopamine was just about pleasure. But those famous rat experiments by Olds and Milner in 1954 demonstrated the crucial distinction between wanting, which is the craving, and liking, which is the reward.
How did they actually isolate wanting? The experiment sounds pretty shocking.
It is. Researchers implanted electrodes to selectively block the release of dopamine in the rats' brains. And what they saw was counterintuitive. The rats lost all desire, all will to live. They wouldn't eat, they wouldn't drink, and they quickly died of thirst even when food was right next to them. The dopamine blockage had switched off their motivation engine.
Wow. And yet, when other researchers squirted sugar water directly into the mouths of these dopamine-depleted rats, they still showed pleasurable facial expressions. So they liked the sugar, they just didn't want it.
Precisely. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure. It is the chemical of anticipation and motivation. Our brains have vastly more neural circuitry for wanting rewards than for liking them. When you look at the brain activity of a gambler, the dopamine surge happens before they place the bet, when the potential outcome is thrillingly uncertain, not necessarily after they get a small win.
So we're primarily driven by the anticipation of a changed internal state. The craving is the desire to close that gap between how we feel now and how we expect to feel after the reward.
And this craving is just a specific modern manifestation of much deeper ancient human motives. Our brains didn't evolve to desire a notification badge on a smartphone. They evolved to fulfill these ancient needs.
Right. Clear does such a great job of linking these modern habits back to their ancient drivers. Can you walk us through a few of those?
Absolutely. The 6 deep ancient motives are conserve energy, obtain food and water, find love and reproduce, connect and bond with others, reduce uncertainty, and achieve status and prestige. And every modern habit maps onto one of these. For instance, using Tinder is a modern solution to the ancient motive of find love. Browsing Facebook constantly satisfies the motive to connect and bond. Even frantically searching Google helps reduce uncertainty.
And posting on Instagram or, getting a high score in a video game taps directly into that motive to achieve status and approval. Our habits are just these highly refined technological solutions to ancient primal desires.
So to harness that, the second law of behavior changes. Make it attractive. Since anticipation is the driver, we have to find a way to reprogram our anticipation to associate the necessary habit with a positive feeling.
One of the easiest and most powerful ways to do that is by shifting the language we use, what Clear calls the get-to shift.
This is such a subtle yet powerful cognitive reframing. Instead of viewing essential behaviors as burdens that you have to do, you reframe them as opportunities that you get to engage in. I have to wake up early for work becomes, I get to wake up early and contribute to a meaningful career. I have to make sales calls becomes, I get to speak to interesting people who might benefit from my help.
It's basically training your mind to look for the privilege in the obligation. The book has that profound example of the man who relied on a wheelchair saying, "I'm not confined to my wheelchair. I am liberated by it. If it wasn't for my wheelchair, I would be bedbound and never able to leave my house." That change in perspective from restriction to liberation, it just transforms the entire internal experience.
You can also use reframing to soften the blow of drawbacks. Saving money isn't sacrifice, it's acquiring future freedom. Exercise isn't an agony, it's a way to build endurance and mental resilience. Meditation interruptions aren't failures. They're repeated chances to practice the art of gently returning to your breath.
And if that subtle language shift isn't enough, the book suggests the powerful tool of creating a motivation ritual.
Right. A motivation ritual works by intensely associating a specific, short cue with a positive, desired mental state until the cue alone sparks the craving. The writer and boxer Ed Lattimore is a perfect example. He noticed that just putting his headphones on, even without playing music, immediately increased his focus. He had conditioned himself. The headphones became the conditioned cue for focused work mode.
And Clear did this in his baseball days. Before every single game, he'd do a specific repeated stretching and throwing ritual. It wasn't just a physical warm-up, it mentally put him in game mode, because the ritual had become the cue associated with feeling competitive, sharp, and confident. By pairing a small, intentional routine with a positive experience, you can basically trick your brain into summoning motivation on demand.
Okay, so we've established the deep psychological drivers, but Clear insists that we profoundly overestimate the power of our internal drive, and we massively underestimate the power of our surroundings. The environment is the silent, pervasive shaper of our behavior.
This ties right back to that psychological equation from Kurt Lewin. Behavior is a function of the person in their environment. B equals FPE. The environment is like this invisible hand that guides our choices, often overpowering our conscious intentions. We don't need a powerful internal decision to whisper in a library, The environment just dictates that behavior.
And this leads us to the first law of behavior change. Make it obvious. Since about 10 million of our 11 million sensory receptors are for sight, visual cues are the greatest catalyst of our behavior. If you want to change your behavior, change what you see.
This is where we see the concept of choice architecture in action, and that Massachusetts General Hospital cafeteria study is the classic example of environmental design just trumping willpower.
Right. Dr. Ann Thorndike and her colleagues, they wanted to subtly improve the diet of the hospital staff without giving lectures or putting up posters, so they decided to manipulate the physical arrangement of the drinks. Originally, the refrigerators next to the cash registers only had soda. They introduced bottled water as an option there, and they placed baskets of water next to the food stations all around the room.
And the results were stunning because they required zero willpower from the staff. In just 3 months, soda sales dropped by 11.4%, while bottled water sales went up by 25.8%. No motivational speeches, nothing. People choose products not because of what they inherently desire, but because of what is immediately visibly available. The most obvious option wins.
We see this principle everywhere. Retail stores put the high-margin items at eye level because they're obvious. And there's that humorous example from Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam where maintenance found that etching a small, realistic fly sticker inside the urinals dramatically improved users' aim. And it led to an 8% reduction in cleaning costs. A simple, obvious visual cue changes behavior instantly.
Clear applied this in his own home with healthy food. He found that when he bought apples and put them in the crisper drawer, they'd just go bad. Out of sight, out of mind. But once he started placing them in a large, beautiful display bowl right in the middle of the kitchen counter, he started eating several every week, simply because they were the default, obvious choice when he walked by.
Environment design also governs the third law, make it easy, or the law of least effort. Behavior naturally follows the path of least resistance, the path with the least friction.
The book uses a fascinating historical example to illustrate the power of friction. The anthropologist Jared Diamond's insight on the spread of agriculture.
Right. Diamond observed that in Europe and Asia, which run primarily east-west, agriculture, and therefore civilization, spread 2 to 3 times faster than in the Americas or Africa, which are north-south oriented. Why? Because continents running east-west share similar climate zones and daylight patterns. Low friction. North-south continents have drastically changing climates, creating high friction for the spread of crops and farming techniques. That geographical friction shaped the trajectory of entire civilizations.
In modern life, friction is the enemy of productivity. Japanese firms pioneered lean production by eliminating waste of all kinds, even if it was just the waste of a worker twisting slightly to reach a tool. They added efficiency by subtracting wasted effort.
And this explains why the most habit-forming and successful modern products are the ones that drastically reduce friction. Ride-sharing services eliminate the friction of finding a cab. Texting eliminated the friction of writing a letter. The goal is always to deliver the same result in an easier, more frictionless way.
So to make good habits easy, we should also prime the environment for future use. I love Oswald Knuckles' strategy of resetting the room.
Knuckles organizes a space not for the action that just happened, but specifically to prepare for the next action. For instance, he wipes down the toilet while he's waiting for the shower water to warm up. When he's done watching TV, he puts the remote back in its stand and arranges the pillows, setting the room up for a good night's sleep and an easy start the next day.
This applies perfectly to morning habits. If you want to exercise, setting out your workout clothes, shoes, and a water bottle the night before, it just reduces the friction of that early morning decision so much. When you wake up, the healthy choice is already the path of least resistance.
We also have to be really conscious of decisive moments. Clear presents these visually. They're the handful of choices each day, like deciding whether to cook a healthy meal or order takeout, that have this outsized stacking impact on the rest of the day. These choices, even if they only take a minute, they set the trajectory for the next 4 hours.
And conversely, to eliminate bad habits. The inversion of the first law. Make it invisible. And the third law, make it difficult. We have to maximize friction.
The more friction, the less likely the behavior. If you want to start checking social media, don't just put your phone on silent. Leave it in another room until noon. That minor inconvenience of having to walk to another room is often enough friction to guarantee hours of focused, distraction-free work. For TV addicts, unplugging the TV and taking the batteries out of the remote so it takes an extra 10 seconds, that's often enough to deter the mindless habit.
This is where automation becomes such a critical tool. Automation is the ultimate form of making a good habit easy. Automating savings plans, setting up automatic bill pay, or using website blockers guarantees the right behavior, especially for tasks that happen infrequently, like rebalancing your investments.
Cleary even uses this strategy with his own work habits. He has his assistant reset his social media passwords every week and only gives them back to him on Friday. That extreme level of friction guarantees a work week that's distraction-free. It makes the bad habit impossible until a specific time.
So we've established the systems, we've mastered the environment, but now for the long haul. The initial burst of novelty inevitably fades. How do we sustain momentum over years when the work becomes monotonous?
This is where we get to the Goldilocks rule. Clear says that humans experience peak motivation, the Goldilocks zone, when working on tasks that are right on the edge of their current abilities. The sweet spot is the perfect midpoint between anxiety and failure, which is too hard, and boredom, which is too easy. This is actually tied to the Yerkes-Dodson law, which plot performance against arousal. Optimal performance needs optimal stimulation.
The comedian Steve Martin is a great illustration of this sustained, just manageable difficulty. When he started stand-up as a teen, he had a short routine. Over 15 years, he continuously expanded his act, but only by a minute or two each year.
He was constantly adding new, slightly challenging material that pushed his ability, but he strategically kept a few jokes that were guaranteed to land. This ensured a steady stream of small victories to keep him motivated, but also enough mistakes and new material to keep him working hard and prevent the boredom of repetition. He was always operating in that perfect zone where success was achievable, but not guaranteed.
The mastery of any field, Clear argues, eventually comes down to who can handle the boredom of practice. The secret of successful athletes or writers isn't just passion, it's who can tolerate doing the same lifts, the same reps, the same pages, day after tedious day. The greatest threat to success is not failure, it's boredom.
Which is why things like junk food, video games, and especially gambling are so highly habit-forming. They use variable rewards. The unpredictable payoff, the unexpected praise, the slightly different taste, the jackpot, it keeps the experience novel and reduces boredom, amplifying the underlying craving. The ideal psychological sweet spot for maintaining desire is roughly a 50-50 split between success and failure. Just enough winning to satisfy, and just enough wanting to maintain the desire to return.
Next, we have to touch on a crucial point that a lot of self-help books ignore: the role of genetics. Not all habits are equally easy or rewarding for everyone. We have to select habits that work with our predispositions.
The comparison between the Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps and the Olympic runner Hicham El Guerrouj demonstrates this perfectly. Phelps is 6'4" Moneys with a massive wingspan and a short torso, perfect for swimming. El Guerrouj is 5'9" but has incredibly long legs and a short upper body, ideal for distance running. They actually wear the same length pant inseam despite the height difference.
Right. If Phelps tried to become an elite distance runner, his large, heavy frame would severely limit him. Genes tell us what endeavors are likely to give us the greatest returns on our effort. We need to find the game where our natural strengths are an advantage, not a liability.
And to find the right habits and the right game, Clear suggests leveraging the Big Five personality traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, and selecting habits that work for your personality.
So, for example, a person who scores low on conscientiousness will naturally struggle with order and organization. It's unrealistic to expect them to suddenly become meticulous, so they have to rely more heavily on environment design and automation, making the system foolproof than someone who's naturally organized.
Exactly. We shouldn't apologize for these genetic differences, but we have to acknowledge them and work strategically around them. The key strategy for finding your advantage is the explore-exploit trade-off. In the early stages of any pursuit, a job, a hobby, you should be in a period of exploration, casting a wide net, experimenting with low stakes.
But once you find a strategy that's winning, that's delivering superior returns, you should shift to exploitation. Dedicate 80 to 90% of your effort there. But the crucial caveat is always to keep 10 to 20% dedicated to continuous, low-stakes exploration. This ensures you're capitalizing on your current strengths while still hunting for the next great advantage.
This requires asking two vital questions. First, what feels like fun to me but work to others? That work that you enjoy or that hurts you less than it hurts the average person is often the work you were naturally designed to excel at. And second, where do I get greater returns than the average person? If something grows quickly for you, that's where you should exploit.
And the highest level of optimization comes when you stop trying to win by being better than everyone else, and you start winning by being different. By combining 2 or 3 skills, say being a great programmer, a competent public speaker, and a strong writer, you create a new category that favors your unique strengths and drastically reduces the competition.
Finally, to maintain mastery, once habits become automatic, we need a formal process of reflection and review. This is the antidote to complacency. Clear points out that once habits shift into the non-conscious mind, we stop paying attention to the tiny errors that inevitably creep in. Habits plus deliberate practice equals mastery.
The famous coach Pat Riley understood this need for rigorous feedback, even for elite athletes. He instituted the Los Angeles Lakers' career best effort system. This tracked positive and negative contributions, not just points and assists, but also turnovers, fouls, and what he called unsung hero deeds, like diving for a loose ball.
And that system forced players to remain aware of their daily effort. It ensured their high-level habits continued to improve rather than decline due to automaticity. Clear applies this personally using 2 audits.
First, the annual review. He tallies his habits and answers 3 questions. What went well, what didn't go well, and what did I learn? That's the macro view.
And second, the 6-month integrity report. This is a much deeper check where he revisits his core values, his stated identity, and his overall mission, asking himself, am I living in accordance with the type of person I claim to be? Am I setting a high enough standard for myself?
These periodic reviews provide crucial perspective. Worrying daily about every little flaw is like looking at yourself in the mirror from an inch away. You only see pores and imperfections. But never reviewing is like never looking at all. Periodic structured review is like viewing yourself from a conversational distance. You see the important changes you should make without being overwhelmed by every single detail.
And the final piece of sustaining momentum is keeping your identity flexible. The danger of having strong habits is they can lock us into a previous identity, like I'm the company CEO or I'm the starting quarterback. When that role inevitably disappears, an identity crisis follows because the person defined themselves by the role, not the underlying characteristics.
The solution is redefining your identity around underlying characteristics that are resilient to change. I'm an athlete becomes, I'm the type of person who is mentally tough and loves a physical challenge. If you get injured, you can still exercise mental toughness in rehab. I'm the CEO becomes, I'm the type of person who builds and creates solutions.
That flexibility allows the core identity to prevail, even as life circumstances or roles change. It ensures your habits are serving a deeper, more enduring purpose than just a temporary title.
This deep dive into atomic habits has been exceptionally thorough. We've covered James Clear's personal journey, showing that true change requires long-term compounding, the necessity of focusing on self-correcting systems over temporary terminal goals, the fundamental importance of identity change, working backward from who do I want to become, the mechanics of the habit loop, driven by that powerful anticipation of reward. And finally, the practical architecture of making habits obvious and easy and sustaining momentum by embracing boredom and rigorous review.
The entire philosophy really hinges on the idea that truly remarkable results are built on tiny, sustainable, unrelenting improvements that, over time, cross that plateau of latent potential. This is the essence of that ancient Greek parable, the Sorites paradox, which asks, does 1 grain of sand make a heap? No. Does 1 more grain make a heap? No. But eventually, enough small actions create the huge, undeniable result. The secret is just consistency.
That is the power of atomic habits. Tiny changes, remarkable results.
As you move forward, integrating these insights into your life, consider that explore-exploit trade-off that we talked about. Even once you feel successful and you're exploiting a highly effective habit routine, your 80 or 90% focus, remember to consciously dedicate 10 to 20% of your life to low-stakes exploration. What new environment could you enter? What combination of skills might create a new, less competitive game for you to play? Never stop exploring. That's where the next great advantage and the next great atomic habit is waiting to be found.
And that's our deep dive for today. Don't forget to subscribe to the Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel for more essential book summaries. We'll see you next time.